My name is Watson, and I live in a small, quiet town where everybody knows everyone else. I've always loved hosting dinner parties at my place. Good food, good wine, and my closest friends gathered around the table. On one warm summer evening, I decided to throw another of these dinners. I had no way of knowing that night would turn into a mystery that still follows me. I spent the whole day getting ready. I used my best dishes, laid out fresh flowers, and filled the house with the smells of roasted chicken and warm, homemade bread. By the time the sun was sinking, the rooms were bathed in a soft, golden light, and my guests began to arrive. Sarah, Mark, Lisa, and John came, chatting and laughing as they walked in. With them was someone new, Tom, a recent arrival to our town. I didn't know him well. He was quiet, almost withdrawn, but I thought inviting him might help him feel included. He seemed genuinely pleased to be asked, and I hoped the evening would do him some good. We gathered around the table and began to eat. The conversation flowed easily among my old friends, stories, teasing, and shared memories. Tom mostly listened, offering a few short comments here and there but never really opening up. I noticed, but I didn't want to push him. After dessert, we moved into the living room to continue talking. That was when Tom's mood noticeably shifted. He grew tense, his shoulders tight, his jaw clenched. He barely spoke and avoided eye contact altogether. I saw it, and concern tugged at me, but I didn't want to embarrass him by asking what was wrong in front of everyone. Without warning, he stood up, muttered something about needing to leave, and headed for the door. Before I could say a word, he was gone, the front door slamming shut behind him. The room fell silent. We just stared at each other, stunned, no one sure what to say. After a few uneasy moments, we tried to salvage the night, but the mood had changed. Eventually, everyone drifted home, still puzzled about Tom's abrupt departure. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Guilt pricked at me. Had I somehow made him uncomfortable? I decided to check on him. His car was in the driveway when I reached his house, but no one answered when I knocked. The place felt oddly still. Assuming he needed space, I went back home, telling myself not to overthink it. Days went by with no word from Tom. None of my friends had seen or heard from him either. Concern turned into alarm, and I finally called the police to report him missing. They took my statement and promised to investigate. Weeks passed, then months. The police searched his house, spoke to neighbors, followed every lead. But there was nothing. It was as if Tom had simply disappeared into thin air. My friends and I were left with only questions, sitting around the same table where he had last joined us, wondering what on earth had happened. One evening I sat alone, replaying that dinner in my mind. Tom's strange silence, the sudden tension, his abrupt exit. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd missed something important, some warning sign. Part of me felt responsible, as if there might have been something I could have done to keep him from walking out that door. Determined to understand, I started looking into Tom's past. I learned he had come to our town after a painful breakup, hoping for a fresh start. He didn't have close friends here, and his family lived far away. The more I found out, the more I realized how little I had actually known him. Around that time, strange things began happening at my own house. One night, while I was alone, I heard a faint rustling outside, like someone moving through the bushes. My heart hammered as I peered through the dark window, but I couldn't make out anything. The sound stopped. I told myself it was just an animal, but the noises continued over the following nights. Soft footsteps, whispers that seemed to vanish when I listened closely, the unsettling sensation of being watched whenever I looked out into the yard. I barely slept. I was constantly on edge, jumping at every creak of the house. Not long after, I came across something the police had somehow missed, an old journal of Tom's, found in his house. It was crammed with his private thoughts and fears, the pages revealing a deeply troubled mind. He wrote about feeling like an outsider, not just in our town, but in life itself. As the entries went on, his words grew darker, thick with paranoia and dread. The final entry was dated the night of my dinner party. "I can't escape it," he'd written. "It's always watching. Always waiting. I need to leave before it's too late." Those words sent a chill through me that I still remember. What had he been so afraid of? What was it? I gave the journal to the police, hoping it might help. But there were no lies hidden in those pages, nothing they could use. The investigation slowly went cold. For most people in town, the memory of that night faded. For me, it never did. I couldn't let it go. On quiet evenings, I'd find myself at the window, watching the darkness, listening for the faint crunch of footsteps or the rustle of leaves. I wondered if Tom was still out there somewhere, frightened and alone, running from something none of us understood. My friends did their best to comfort me, but the truth remained. Tom was gone, and we had no idea why. That dinner party, which had ended pleasantly for everyone else, cast a long shadow over my life. It reminded me how an ordinary night can suddenly twist into something impossible to explain. In the still hours when I'm alone with my thoughts, I see Tom at my table again, quiet and tense, getting ready to leave. The questions linger, like a ghost that refuses to be laid to rest. So I keep searching for answers in whatever way I can, hoping that someday the mystery will break open and Tom's story will finally have an ending. A few years ago, something happened with my son, Alex, that changed the way we both see the world. He was 20 then and out with friends one night. I'd already gone to bed when I heard the front door creak open. Worried, I got up to check. James, his friend, stood in the living room, half carrying Alex. James was a tall, muscular young man, and he held Alex up like it was nothing. My son, on the other hand, was a mess, clothes wrinkled, eyes half closed, speech slurred. He was very drunk, barely able to stand. "Sorry about this," James said in a steady voice. Alex had a bit too much. Any irritation I might have felt was drowned by concern. "Let's get him to his room," I said. Together we hauled Alex upstairs and laid him in bed. He mumbled nonsense, head lolling to the side. I took off his shoes and pulled the blanket over him, hoping sleep would clear his system by morning. James stood in the doorway a moment, watching. "Thank you for bringing him home," I said, feeling relieved he wasn't passed out somewhere else. "No problem," James replied with a small smile. "I'll check on him tomorrow." He left and I went back to bed, telling myself everything was fine. The next day Alex was groggy but all right. He barely remembered the night, only that he'd been out with friends and drunk too much. Life slid back into its normal routine, and I filed the incident away as one of those messy but harmless growing-up moments. A year later, all of that shattered. I was watching TV one evening when a breaking news report came on. The anchor stood in front of a hotel, yellow tape behind her, police milling around. "A young man was found dead in his hotel room earlier today," she said. "The victim, whose name has not yet been released, was reportedly checked into the hotel last night by a friend. Police are now searching for that friend, who is considered a suspect." A chill crawled up my spine. Something about the story felt horribly familiar. The reporter went on. "Witnesses say the suspect left the hotel early this morning. Police have released this sketch." A drawing flashed onto the screen. It looked like James. My heart thudded painfully. I stared, trying to convince myself I was wrong, but the resemblance was undeniable. I grabbed my phone and called Alex. He answered on the third ring, still sleepy. "Alex, turn on the news," I said, my voice tight. "Right now." A few minutes later he called back, fully awake and shocked. "What do we do?" he asked. "I don't know," I said, my mind racing. "We need to call the police." We did. Not long after, detectives sat in our living room, notebooks open, asking about James. Alex told them everything. How James had brought him home drunk that night, how long they'd been friends, what he was like. They listened intently, writing down every detail. Days turned into weeks. The story dominated the news, and in our small town, James's name was on everyone's lips. The more details came out, the worse it got. James had gotten his friend drunk, checked him into a hotel, and then killed him before slipping away in the early hours. The cruelty and coldness of it were hard to fathom. Alex was devastated. This was someone he had trusted, someone he'd let into his life. He withdrew into himself, spending most of his time alone in his room. I tried to comfort him, but what words can steady you when your friend turns out to be a killer? One quiet night a few weeks after the story broke, Alex and I sat in the living room. The house was silent except for the ticking clock. "Mom," he said suddenly, not looking up, "do you think I could have been next?" The question hung in the air, heavy and terrifying. I had asked myself the same thing too many times. "I don't know," I answered softly, "but you're here and you're safe. That's what matters now." Eventually, the police found James. He'd fled to a neighboring state, hiding in a rundown motel. His arrest brought some relief, but the damage he'd done couldn't be undone. The trial was agonizing. Horrific details came out, details I wish I could forget. In the end, James was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. But for Alex and me, life never fully returned to normal. The fear and betrayal left marks we still carry. Alex fought hard to move forward, but I still sometimes see the haunted look in his eyes, the silent question of how close he came to being a victim himself. Years have passed. We've tried to rebuild. We've learned a brutal lesson about trust and about the darkness that can live inside people who seem ordinary, even kind. We still talk, now and then, about the night James brought Alex home. It's a reminder of how narrowly we escaped losing everything. We go on, but the shadow of that time is never completely gone. Before I move on to the next story, if you're hearing these for the first time, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you don't miss upcoming scary stories. Sharing them with your friends and family really helps. Thank you. Last September, my friends and I decided to go for a night drive. We were bored and craving a little adventure. The sky was clear, the air was cold, and the moonlight made the empty roads look strangely beautiful and a bit eerie. There were 4 of us in the car: me, Alex, Sam, and Jenny. We drove without any real destination, music playing, laughter filling the dark. Eventually, the conversation shifted, as it often does on late drives, to ghost stories. Someone brought up an old abandoned house at the edge of town. "We should go there," Sam said, grinning. The idea sent a thrill through me, half excitement, half dread. We all agreed, and Alex, who was driving, turned down the road that led toward it. The farther we went, the narrower and rougher the road became. Trees leaned in from both sides, their branches twisted like skeletal fingers in the moonlight. Finally, we saw it, the house. It sat at the end of a long gravel driveway, surrounded by tall grass and choking bushes. The place was big, its roof sagging, windows broken like empty eye sockets. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. Our headlights splashed over the crumbling walls, throwing warped shadows across the facade. We parked a little down the road, not wanting to stop right in front. As we walked up the driveway, the air seemed colder. Gravel crunched under our shoes, and each step echoed in the quiet. The front door hung crookedly on its hinges. Alex pushed it open, and it groaned like it hadn't been moved in decades. Inside, the air was thick and stale, smelling of dust and rot. Moonlight slipped through broken windows, stretching long, distorted shadows across the floorboards. The only sound was the occasional creak of the old house settling around us. We decided to split up. Jenny and I headed upstairs while Alex and Sam stayed on the ground floor. The staircase complained loudly under our weight. Every step echoed through the empty building. Upstairs, we found rooms full of old, sheet-covered furniture, shattered picture frames, and cobwebs in every corner. It felt like a life once lived had been abruptly abandoned. We moved from room to room, our flashlights cutting lines of white through the darkness. In one room, I spotted a worn diary lying on a dusty table. I opened it, but the ink had faded so badly the words were almost impossible to read. Suddenly, a loud crash rang out from downstairs. My heart leaped into my throat. "Alex, Sam," Jenny called. No answer. We hurried down the stairs. The living room was empty, but the front door, which had been open, was now closed. We hadn't heard it shut. A sick sense of dread settled over me. "Something's wrong," I said, my voice shaking. Let's find them and get out. We searched room to room. The kitchen was empty, so was the dining room. Finally, we reached a small storage room at the back of the house. Alex and Sam were there, standing rigid, staring at the floor. I followed their gaze. In the middle of the floor was a trapdoor already open. "Did you open that?" I asked. Sam shook his head. "It was like that when we got here." A cold draft spilled up from the darkness below, making my skin prickle. Our flashlight beams were swallowed almost immediately by the blackness. Against my better judgment, we decided to go down. The narrow wooden ladder creaked under our weight as we descended. The basement was damp and icy, the floor hard-packed earth in places. Shelves lined the walls, cluttered with dusty jars and rusted tools. In one corner, a small, flickering light caught our attention. We crept toward it and found an old lantern hanging from a nail, the weak flame inside barely pushing back the dark. Then we heard it, footsteps overhead. Someone else was in the house. Our hearts hammered. We switched off our flashlights and froze, listening. The footsteps grew louder, crossing the floor above us, heading toward the trapdoor. We didn't even dare to breathe. The steps stopped directly above us. Slowly the trapdoor began to creak open. A figure appeared at the top of the ladder, framed by the dim light from upstairs. It was a man, tall, thin, with wild, unkempt hair and eyes that seemed to gleam in the low light. He started climbing down. We retreated into the shadows, hoping he wouldn't see us. He moved with a deliberate slowness, scanning the room as if he were looking for something or someone. He muttered under his breath words we couldn't make out, and the sound of his voice made my skin crawl. We needed to escape, but the only way out was past him. Then he stopped moving and turned his head directly toward us. His eyes locked onto mine, and a slow, cold smile spread across his face. He started walking straight toward us. Panic took over. We bolted for the ladder. Alex scrambled up first, then Jenny, then me, with Sam behind me. Every second felt like an hour. As we neared the top, a hand shot out from below and clamped around Sam's ankle. He screamed, kicking wildly, trying to break free. We grabbed him, pulling with everything we had. For a moment it felt like a tug-of-war between us and the dark. Then Sam's foot slipped from the man's grip. We yanked him through the opening, slammed the trapdoor shut and forced a rusty bolt across it. We didn't wait to see if it would hold. We ran. Out the storage room, through the hall, out the front door and down the drive, not stopping until we reached the car. We piled in and Alex tore away from the house, the tires spitting gravel. No one looked back. The silence in the car was thick. The excitement of our late-night adventure had curdled into something like pure terror. We never went back to that house. We never even really talked about it again. But sometimes, driving past the edge of town in the dark, I feel a chill creep up my spine and find myself pressing down on the gas, eager to get far away from the memory of that man and his terrible, knowing smile. I work the night shift at a quiet gas station in New Hampshire. The job is usually simple: stocking shelves, mopping floors, and running the register for the occasional late-night customer. Most nights pass in a calm, almost sleepy routine. One night, as I was getting close to closing, the air in the store felt different, heavier somehow. The silence was deeper, the hum of the refrigerators louder. It felt like the world was holding its breath. I brushed it off and went back to wiping down the counter. Just before midnight, an old car pulled up to the pump. A few moments later, the door opened and an elderly man stepped inside. He wore khakis and a button-down shirt. His white hair was neatly combed, and he moved slowly but with a certain careful grace. "Good evening, sir. How can I help you?" I asked. He nodded politely and wandered the aisles, seemingly in no rush. I went back to straightening the magazines. After a few minutes, he came to the counter with a small bottle of water and a pack of gum. "Will that be all?" I asked, ringing him up. He nodded again, his eyes fixed on my face. There was something about his gaze that made me uneasy, though I couldn't say why. I handed him his change. As I did, his hand shot out and gripped my wrist. His fingers were ice cold. "Hell is a real place," he said in a low, gravelly voice. And the devil's already got his hand on you, girl, be careful. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. I stared at him, shocked, his words hanging heavy between us. Then he released my wrist, picked up his items, and walked out without another word. I watched his car drive off, the red glow of his taillights shrinking into the night. My heart was pounding. His warning echoed in my head, unsettling and dark. I tried to shake it off and finish my shift, but the unease stayed with me. When I finally locked up and drove home, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see his car behind me. The night felt darker than usual, every shadow outside my windows seeming deeper and more threatening. When I got to my apartment, I double-locked the door and checked every window. I barely slept. Every minor sound in the building made me flinch, and when I did drift off, I dreamed of his voice and that cold grip on my wrist. The next day at work, I told my coworker about the encounter. He laughed and said the old man was probably just crazy. I tried to laugh with him, but the feeling wouldn't leave. It was like a weight pressing on my chest. Days became weeks. Life went on, and his warning gradually slipped to the back of my mind. Still, every time I worked the night shift, I felt a faint nervousness under the surface. Then, one night while I was restocking shelves, I heard a whisper. It was faint, like someone speaking from far away. I turned, expecting to see a customer, but the store was empty. I tried to ignore it and went back to work. The whisper came again, then again, louder. Still impossible to make out, but constant, like a voice right at the edge of understanding. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. My skin prickled. The air felt cold. The lights overhead flickered for a second, throwing warped shadows across the floor. I swallowed hard and tried to steady my breathing. Suddenly, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I spun around. No one was there. My chest tightened. The whispers swelled, crowding my ears. Panicking, I ran to the front counter and grabbed the phone. My hands shook as I tried to call my coworker. No answer. I checked the clock. Almost midnight. The old man's words came rushing back, sharper than ever. Hell is a real place. The devil's already got his hand on you. Then the chime above the door rang. I looked up. He was standing there, the same old man, the same neat clothes, the same unsettling eyes. He stepped inside, the door swinging closed behind him, and walked toward me with slow, measured steps. "Hell is a real place," he said, his voice like gravel. "And the devil's already got his hand on you, girl. Be careful." I stumbled backward, my heart hammering. His gaze was so intense it felt like it cut straight through me. He reached out and took my wrist again. His grip was just as cold, just as unyielding. "Be careful," he whispered. I yanked my arm away, turned, and bolted for the door. I didn't look back. I sprinted to my car, jumped in, and peeled out of the lot, shaking all over. When I reached my apartment, I locked the door and collapsed onto the couch, my pulse racing, his words crashing around in my mind. I called in sick the next morning. I couldn't bring myself to go back that night, or the next. I never saw the old man again, but his warning stayed with me. Even now, the memory of his touch and that voice still chills me. And sometimes I can't escape the feeling that something dark is out there, watching, just beyond the edge of the light. My name is John, and I like taking my family on little getaways whenever city life starts to feel too cramped. One summer I rented an old farmhouse on Airbnb, a big place with a large yard, rustic charm, and even a pool. It seemed like the perfect spot for a quiet weekend. We arrived on a bright Friday afternoon. My wife Julian and our two kids, Liam and Zoe, were buzzing with excitement. The farmhouse stood at the end of a long gravel road, surrounded by trees. A wide porch wrapped around the front, its wooden steps creaking under our feet. Inside, the place was filled with antique furniture and old photographs on the walls. It felt like stepping into another time. After unpacking, we headed straight for the pool. The kids splashed and yelled, throwing water at each other, while Julian and I sat on the edge, our feet in the cool water. The air was fresh, and aside from the kids' laughter and the rustle of leaves, it was utterly peaceful. As it grew dark, We hung a few lights around the pool and ate dinner outside under the stars. Everything felt perfect. Then I heard it, a crunching sound like footsteps on dry leaves somewhere beyond the edge of the light. I paused, listening. The darkness around the yard felt thicker suddenly. "Did you hear that?" I asked Julian. "I'm sure it's just an animal," she said, trying to sound relaxed. But I could tell she'd heard it too. The sound came again, closer this time. I told the kids to get out of the pool and head inside. They complained a bit, but one look at my face and they obeyed. We gathered our things quickly, and once we were in the house, I locked the door. Inside, the farmhouse felt safer, but the feeling that something was wrong wouldn't leave me. I walked from window to window, checking the locks. Julian and I tucked the kids into their beds, then sat in the living room. I kept my phone and a flashlight within arm's reach. Hours passed in uneasy quiet. Just when I was starting to relax, there was a loud knock at the front door. My heart jumped. I grabbed the flashlight and peered through the peephole. A man stood on the porch in a police uniform. "Open up, it's the police," he called. I hesitated. Why would an officer be here so late? "What's this about?" I asked through the door. "There's been a report of suspicious activity in the area," he replied. "We need to make sure everything's okay. Please open the door." Something wasn't right. His tone was calm, but there was an edge to it that made me uneasy. "I'm going to call the station to confirm," I said. As I dialed the local police number, the man's knocking grew louder, more impatient. "Open the door. Now," he demanded. The dispatcher answered, and I quickly explained what was happening. They told me no officer had been sent to our location and urged me not to open the door. Real officers were now on their way. Cold fear ran through me. I told Julian to take the kids and hide in one of the bedrooms. I turned off all the lights and peeked through a crack in the curtains. There were other figures moving in the yard. I could see faint silhouettes shifting between the trees. The man on the porch kept pounding on the door, insisting he was the police. The handle rattled as he tried it. Then came the sound of someone testing the windows, tapping, pushing, looking for a way in. My phone buzzed. The real officers were close. As the minutes crawled by, the banging on the door grew more aggressive. Then fists slammed against the windows. I held my breath, praying the glass wouldn't shatter. Finally, blue and red lights appeared at the far end of the driveway. The figures outside scattered into the trees, vanishing into the night. The man on the porch disappeared with them. Actual police officers arrived, searched the property, and combed the nearby woods, but found no one. They told us we'd done the right thing by not opening the door. They warned us that, on rare occasions, people pose as officers to gain access to isolated homes. Whatever their intentions, they're never good. They recommended we find somewhere else to stay that night. We packed up quickly and headed to a nearby hotel. The kids were frightened but safe, and although Julian and I were shaken, we were grateful things hadn't gone worse. As we drove away from the farmhouse, one thought kept circling in my mind. What would have happened if I had opened that door? We never did find out who those fake officers were or what exactly they wanted. But that night changed the way I think about safety. Since then, I've been much more careful, especially when we're staying somewhere unfamiliar. Our peaceful countryside weekend turned into a night of terror, but we were lucky. We walked away. It was a harsh lesson in trusting my instincts and double-checking everything, no matter how safe a place might appear. In 2016, I had an experience I still can't fully explain. It was a Saturday night, and I was exhausted from a long week at work. I decided to go to bed early, hoping to finally catch up on sleep. My small one-bedroom apartment was quiet, the only sound the low hum of the refrigerator. Around 9 p.m., I crawled into bed, pulled the blanket up to my chin, closed my eyes, and drifted quickly into a deep sleep. My dreams were vivid and unsettling, full of strange, disjointed images. I tried to wake up, but it felt like I was trapped in my own body, unable to move, unable to open my eyes. When I finally did wake, the room was dark. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. 3:33 a.m. Still groggy, I sat up and rubbed my eyes. That was when I saw something that sent a jolt of fear through me. There was another bed in my room. It stood right next to mine, where there had definitely been nothing when I went to sleep. My apartment was tiny. There was barely enough space for my own bed, a dresser, and a small desk. An extra bed simply didn't fit. And yet there it was. It looked exactly like my bed, same dark wooden frame, same white sheets, and someone was lying in it. The sheet was pulled all the way over their head, covering their face completely. The figure was completely still, as if deeply asleep. Cold sweat broke out along my neck. No one else had a key to my apartment. I hadn't invited anyone over. There was no way someone should have been there. I wanted to scream, but my voice wouldn't come. My mind raced. Should I call the police? Run? Turn on the light? I decided to move as quietly as possible. Carefully, I slid out of bed, trying not to make a sound, and edged toward the door. My hands shook as I reached for the light switch. I missed it the first time and cursed under my breath. On the second try, the light flicked on. The figure didn't move. Bathed in the harsh glow, the extra bed and the sheet-covered shape on it looked even more real. The sheet was old, slightly yellowed, with small stains scattered across it. I stood there for a long moment, heart hammering, forcing myself to breathe. Then, driven by a mixture of terror and stubborn need to know, I stepped closer. The sheet was thin enough that I could see the outline of the person underneath, arms, legs, head, but still no face. My hand trembled as I reached out. Just as my fingers brushed the fabric, the figure moved. I lurched backward. Slowly, the person under the sheet sat up. The sheet stayed draped over their head, hiding their face. They turned toward me, and though I couldn't see their eyes, I felt them, heavy and fixed on me. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. Fear pinned me where I stood. The figure stood up, the sheet still clinging around them, and took a step in my direction. "Who are you?" I whispered, barely able to get the words out. No answer. They just stood there, silent and still, staring. That broke whatever spell had frozen me. I bolted for the door, hands fumbling with the lock. Behind me, I heard slow, deliberate footsteps coming closer. The deadbolt finally turned. I yanked the door open and ran into the hallway, slamming it shut behind me. I didn't stop. I ran down the stairs and out into the street, sucking in great lungfuls of cold night air outside the building. I stood there shaking, my mind racing. Who had been in my apartment? How had they gotten in? What were they? I wasn't going back in there alone. I called the police. When they arrived, I did my best to explain what had happened, though it sounded insane even to my own ears. They looked concerned but skeptical and told me to wait outside while they checked the apartment. I paced the sidewalk, heart beating so loudly I could hear it. After what felt like forever, the officers came back out. "There's no one in there," one of them said. "We checked the whole apartment. Are you sure you weren't dreaming?" I knew I'd been awake. I knew what I'd seen. But I didn't argue. I thanked them and watched their car drive away. Eventually, I forced myself to go back upstairs. My room looked exactly as it had before I went to bed. One bed, my own, nothing more. No extra frame. No second set of sheets. No sign of anyone else at all. I checked every door and window. All were securely locked. A cold realization settled over me. Whatever, or whoever, had been there was gone without a trace. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat on the couch with the lights on, watching shadows crawl across the walls until dawn. I moved to a new apartment not long after, hoping distance would help. It did a little. But sometimes, late at night, half asleep and half awake, I get the cold, crawling sensation that I'm not alone. And I can't help wondering if one night I'll open my eyes at 3:33 a.m. and see that extra bed again, with that sheet-covered figure waiting silently beside me. I was working the graveyard shift at the gas station again, long after most people were asleep. The night was still, and I was halfway through my shift. The store was empty, just the constant hum of refrigerators and the soft buzz of the fluorescent lights keeping me company. I was stocking a shelf when I heard the door chime. A woman walked in, holding the hand of a young boy. They both looked terrified. Her clothes were torn, her face streaked with dried tears. The boy clung to her side, eyes wide and darting nervously around the store. She came up to the counter, her voice barely steady. "Can I use your phone?" "Of course," I said, handing her the store phone. Her hands shook as she dialed. The boy stayed pressed against her leg, watching every movement like he expected something bad to happen at any moment. I tried not to listen, but bits of her rushed, whispered conversation reached me. She was trying to find someone, anyone, to help her. When she hung up, she looked at me anxiously. "Is it okay if we stay here for a while?" "Stay as long as you need," I said. I offered them some drinks and snacks on the house. She gave me a small, tired smile and thanked me. They sat down in a corner of the store. The boy nibbled on a candy bar while she sipped from a water bottle, shoulders still tense. Time crawled. The quiet felt different now, charged with tension. I had no idea what they'd been through, but it was clear they were escaping something, or someone. About an hour later, the door chime sounded again, louder this time, like the door had been yanked open. A man stormed in. His face was twisted with anger, eyes scanning the store until they landed on the woman and the boy. "There you are," he snarled, striding toward them. The woman shrank back, dragging the boy behind her. "Sir, you need to leave," I said, moving quickly to stand between him and them. My voice shook, but I held my ground. "Get out of my way," he roared. "She's coming with me." He tried to push past me, but I blocked him as best I could. "Sir, I'm calling the police," I warned, reaching for the phone with a hand that felt too light, too shaky. Rage flashed across his face. He lunged toward me, knocking the phone from my grasp. It clattered to the floor, but I snatched it up and managed to dial 911. "We need police at the gas station on Elm Street," I shouted. "Right now." The dispatcher told me officers were on the way. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours. The man kept shouting, swearing, trying to drag the woman toward the door. She clung to her son, crying, refusing to move. The boy sobbed into her side, trembling. I stayed in the man's way, not sure what I'd do if he turned his attention back to me, but knowing I couldn't just step aside. At last, the distant wail of sirens cut through the night. Moments later, two officers burst through the door, guns drawn. "Step away from them," one shouted. The man froze, hands half raised. The officers moved in quickly, cuffed him, and marched him out to the squad car. He was still cursing, but he was gone. The woman collapsed into a chair, sobbing with relief. The boy clung to her, still afraid but clearly comforted by the fact that the man was no longer looming over them. One of the officers stayed behind to talk to her. She explained that the man was her boyfriend and that he'd been abusive for a long time. Tonight she'd finally grabbed her son and run. The officer assured her she was safe now and said they would help her get to a safe place. Relief washed over me, mixed with a lingering tremor of fear. The whole thing had been terrifying, but at least, for once, it ended with help arriving in time. The woman thanked me over and over, tears shining in her eyes. I told her I'd only done what anyone should do. The police waited with them until a social worker arrived and arranged for them to spend the night in a safe house. As they left, the woman turned to me one last time. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. I watched them walk out into the night, holding hands, finally out of his reach. The store fell quiet again. The refrigerators hummed, the lights buzzed, but the place didn't feel the same. The graveyard shift had shown me that, sometimes, being there in the middle of the night really matters. I still think about that woman and her son, and hope they found peace and safety. That night stays with me as a reminder that sometimes all it takes to stand up to darkness is refusing to step aside. When I was younger, I loved exploring abandoned places. There was something irresistible about buildings that had once been full of life but now stood empty and quiet. I liked walking through those forgotten spaces, imagining the people who had been there before, tracing the slow decay of what used to be new. A few years ago, my friends and I decided to explore an abandoned school in our town. The building had been closed for years, and stories about it were everywhere. People said it was haunted, That strange sounds came from inside at night, that shadows moved behind the cracked windows. We wanted to see for ourselves. It was the perfect night for it. We met at my house with flashlights, snacks, and fully charged phones. There were 4 of us: me, Tom, Lisa, and Sarah. We were excited, but under the jokes and laughter, we were all a little scared. On the walk to the school, we traded stories we'd heard. Some said they'd seen lights flickering in the windows. Others swore they'd heard voices and footsteps when the building should have been empty. When the school finally came into view, it looked even worse than we'd imagined. Broken windows gaped like missing teeth. The front doors were boarded up. Vines crawled along the cracked walls, and paint peeled in large, curling strips. It looked like it belonged in a horror movie. We found a way in through a shattered window at the back. One by one, we climbed through, trying not to cut ourselves or make too much noise. Inside, we clicked on our flashlights. The beams cut through the darkness, revealing long, dusty hallways lined with rusting lockers. The air was thick with the smell of mold and old, damp paper. We agreed to stick together. None of us wanted to get lost in the maze of corridors. Our footsteps echoed loudly. Every sound seemed amplified by the emptiness. We started in the main hallway near what had once been the principal's office. The door was slightly open. We pushed it gently. The room was a wreck. Papers were scattered across the floor. The desk was overturned. Drawers hung open, their contents spilled out, as if someone had left in a frantic hurry. A shiver ran over me as I wondered what could have caused such chaos. We moved on to the classrooms. Desks and chairs sat in crooked rows, some broken, all buried in dust. Books lay open where they had been left, their pages yellowed and flaking. It felt as though the students had gotten up one day and simply never returned. In one classroom, we found a chalkboard with smeared writing on it. The words were hard to decipher, but they looked like some sort of warning. Tom, ever the fearless one, laughed and said it was probably kids messing around. Still, the sight of it made my stomach twist. As we kept exploring, a sudden loud bang echoed from somewhere deeper in the building. We froze. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered. We all nodded, our flashlights trembling slightly in our hands. Every instinct told me to leave. Instead, we followed the sound. We walked down a long, dim hallway lined with old photos, black and white pictures of students and teachers smiling proudly. In the glow of our flashlights, their frozen faces looked strangely watchful, as if their eyes were following us. At the end of the hall, we reached the gymnasium. The doors were closed, but faint noises seeped from the other side. Tom took a deep breath and pushed the doors open. The gym was vast, our flashlights barely reaching the far walls. The floorboards creaked under our feet as we stepped inside. Then we saw it. In the center of the gym stood a figure, dressed in old, torn clothing. It faced away from us, shoulders hunched, chest rising and falling like it was breathing hard. We stopped dead. My mouth went dry. Time seemed to stretch. Slowly, the figure turned. Its face was pale, almost gray. The eyes were dark and sunken, like hollow pits. It stared straight at us and released a scream, a shrill, inhuman sound that cut through the air like a knife. We ran. I don't remember how we got out of the gym, or how we found our way back through the hallways to the broken window. All I remember is the raw, animal terror driving me forward. We didn't stop until we were outside, far from the building, gasping for breath. We never went back to that school. We stopped exploring abandoned places altogether. The thrill we'd once chased had been replaced by a knowledge we didn't want, that some of those empty, forgotten buildings aren't really empty at all. The school still stands there, slowly rotting away, a silent shape against the sky. And as far as I'm concerned, it can stay that way. Some doors are better left unopened, and some places are better left alone.